Have you ever carried a memory so heavy that it shaped every step you took? Imagine living with guilt for 12 long years, haunted by promises you couldn't keep, until fate gives you one last chance to make things right. That's the world Caleb Whitmore walked through, once a soldier, now a broken man hiding from his past. And Eveline Cross, the daughter of the woman he couldn't save, suddenly thrust back into his life. But what happens when the only proof of justice lies in a ledger that could either save hundreds or cost them both their lives? When betrayal closes in from every shadow, and the people you trust most may not make it through the night. How do you choose between survival and sacrifice? If it were you, could you walk into danger again, knowing the cost might be your own soul? Or would you turn away, leaving the past buried with the dead? Stay with us, and you'll discover not just a story of gunfights and betrayal, but of redemption, courage, and the fragile hope of starting again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey. The ridges of Redstone Valley glowed like embers as the sun dipped low, painting the dry land in shades of fire and rust. Summer was bowing out, and the first edge of autumn carried on the breeze, sharp and earthy, laced with pine and grit. In that silence, broken only by wind and a hawk's cry, Caleb Whitmore moved like a shadow through the timber. His boots, worn thin from 12 years in the hills, barely stirred the forest floor. Sweat trickled under the brim of his hat, but his breath stayed steady. Patience was survival out here, and patience was something he had earned. The buck he had been trailing finally stopped at a clearing, lowering its head to graze. Caleb raised his rifle, sights steady, heartbeat loud in his ears. Then a gunshot cracked the stillness, not his own. The deer vanished like smoke. Caleb lowered the rifle and froze, listening. Another sound followed, a woman's scream, sharp and raw, tearing across the valley from the east. Instinct buried deep, the kind he thought he'd left behind with the war, surged up and sent him running. He crossed the slope with the ease of a man who knew every ridge and draw, closing in on the noise. Another shot rang out. Closer. He dropped low at the crest of a rise. Below, a figure in white staggered through a dry creek bed, clothes ripped, bare feet bleeding. 3 riders thundered behind her. Caleb's jaw hardened. He didn't need the story, he knew a chase when he saw one. His rifle barked once into the sky. The riders jerked their reins, wheeling to face him. The woman faltered, collapsing to her knees, clutching something white against her chest. Caleb descended the ridge, slow, rifle loose but ready. She was young, maybe mid-20s, her dark hair tangled across her face. The burly rider in front sneered, "Best step aside, stranger." Just runaways were rounding up, Caleb's boots planted in the dust between her and them. "Funny," he said, voice rough from years of disuse. "Folks don't usually hunt property with bullets." She stole. Their leader snapped, hand resting too close to his pistol. Caleb glanced at the woman. Her eyes, bright with fever and fear, still carried a spark of defiance. "Please," she whispered hoarsely. "Don't." The rider spat. "Move on, old man, ain't your fight." But Caleb didn't move. 12 years of solitude had taught him to walk away. 12 years of nightmares reminded him of the cost of staying. Yet something in her gaze, some echo of a face he once knew, anchored him to that stretch of earth. "Reckon it is now," he said. The leader's expression soured. He jerked his reins. "Remember him," he told the others. Then, to the woman, "Run all you like. We'll catch you sooner or later." They turned west, toward Silver Peak Mine, their silhouettes fading into the haze. Caleb turned back. The woman had collapsed fully, trembling, her grip still locked on the cloth. He knelt beside her. The back of her dress was torn open, welts and scars carved deep into her skin, some fresh, some old. Among them was an emblem burned into the flesh, the insignia of the 23rd Georgia Battalion. Caleb's stomach clenched. Memories long buried pressed to the surface. Her eyes fluttered open. "Please," she begged again, clutching the cloth like it was her last tether to life. "I won't take it," Caleb said softly. "Can you stand?" She tried, but her legs gave way. Without a word, Caleb lifted her into his arms. She was far too light, burning with fever, her head heavy against his shoulder. He carried her through the fading light until the outline of his cabin rose among the pines. The cabin was simple, cut by his own hands, with a stone chimney and a porch that faced the valley. Inside, he laid her gently on his bed, lit a lamp, and set about tending her wounds. He left the cloth she clutched untouched, covering it with a blanket, honoring her plea. Hours passed. Caleb cleaned and bound her injuries, the marks on her back telling of cruelty too deliberate to be chance. War had shown him many horrors, but never this. When the cloth slipped aside, he glimpsed a line of words stitched into its lining, "Silver Peak Mine, 187 souls." His frown deepened, but he did not pry further. Everyone in these hills carried secrets. He, more than anyone, understood that. Through the night he kept watch, brewing coffee and feeding the stove. Past midnight, her fever broke. Her eyes opened, uncertain, settling on him. "You're safe," he said simply. She searched his face, then gave the smallest nod before her eyes closed again. Caleb stayed in the chair until dawn, his old nightmares stirred by new questions. The first touch of morning light slipped through the cracks of the cabin shutters, falling across rough-hewn planks and the weary face of Caleb Whitmore. He rose stiffly, every bone reminding him of the years he had carried alone in these hills. He turned toward the bed where the woman lay. To his surprise, she was awake. Her dark eyes followed him, alert but guarded, as if measuring the distance between them and deciding how much of herself to risk. She had pulled herself upright against the wall, thin frame lost inside the blanket he had drawn over her, the scrap of white cloth still pressed tight against her chest. Caleb poured water into a tin cup and walked to her slowly. "Water?" he asked, voice low. For a moment she hesitated, then reached out with a hand that shook. The cool tin touched her lips, and she drank in short gulps. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough as gravel. He nodded once, not pressing her. Turning back to the stove, he stirred the oats simmering quietly. The smell of coffee thickened the room, and for the first time in years, the small cabin felt like it held more than silence. "There's breakfast," he said evenly. "If you think you can keep it down." Her words came after a pause, direct and sharp. "Why are you helping me?" Caleb stopped, staring into the rising steam of the pot. He could have said many things, that it was chance, or pity, or nothing but instinct, but all of them felt like half-truths. "Seemed right," he said finally. "Those men will be back." "Probably." She clutched the mug of coffee he handed her, her hands trembling around the heat. "You don't know what you've stepped into?" "No." Caleb agreed. "I don't." He pulled the chair closer, meeting her gaze. "But you're here now. My name's Caleb Whitmore. This cabin's mine. You can stay until you're strong enough to leave, or longer, if you've got nowhere else." She studied him over the rim of the mug, weighing his words like a gambler considers his last coin. At length, she spoke. "Eveline Cross. Most called me Eveline once, though some have shortened it." Caleb dipped his head in acknowledgement. "Fair enough." He didn't pry further. "There's a creek behind the pines," he offered. Water's good. I can heat some for you to wash. I'd like that. Thank you. The two drank in silence, the kind of quiet that held weight, but not discomfort. Caleb was not a man of talk. He had learned long ago that silence could keep ghosts at bay better than words. Yet he noticed the way Eveline studied him, not suspicious, but observant, as if she recognized the cost of living with too much unsaid. Later he brought her soap and a shirt that had once belonged to his late wife. It hung loose on her frame. He stepped out onto the porch to give her privacy. The land spread before him, rolling ridges cut by scarlet rock, stretching into forever. This valley had been his refuge, carved by his hands and stubborn will. But last night had shaken something loose. Those riders were no passing trouble. They carried the stamp of the world he had left behind. And the scar burned into Eveline's skin. The mark of the 23rd Georgia Battalion had stirred memories he had buried so deep he thought the earth itself had swallowed them. Footsteps behind him drew him back. Eveline emerged slowly, wrapped in clothes too large, her damp hair spilling over her shoulders. The folded cloth was still in her grasp, clean now, but worn from handling. Caleb's voice came quiet, rough-edged. "Those belong to my wife. She was taller than you." Eveline's eyes widened, her expression softening. "Where is she now, Tennessee? Buried there." His tone closed the door on further questions. She nodded, accepting the boundary. She came to stand beside him, both of them gazing over the valley's endless ridges. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. "That's why I stayed. How long? 12 years. Her profile stayed taut, shoulders rigid as though she carried weight even standing still. "Safe isn't a word that fits me anymore. Mr. Whitmore." "Caleb," he corrected quietly. "Caleb," she echoed, tasting the name. Then, almost reluctantly, "You risked yourself yesterday. I owe you the truth." "You don't owe me," he said, though his jaw worked against the urge to press. "I do." Eveline turned to him fully. "Those men answer to Victor Halloway. He owns the Silver Peak mine and most of the town beside it. Folks think it's just hard work and bad wages. But what it really is," her voice wavered. "I've seen the marks," Caleb said, sparing her the pain of finishing. She touched her shoulder unconsciously, where the scars were deepest. The brands identify the workers, who they belong to, which overseer claims them. Makes it easy to track us when we run. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "That insignia, the battalion." She nodded. "Halloway was a colonel once. The 23rd Georgia was his regiment. He makes sure no one forgets it." "How many times?" Caleb asked. "This was my third." Her voice steadied, though her fingers trembled. "The first time they broke me and locked me in a wooden box. The second was worse. This time, they'll kill me for what I carry." She slowly unfolded the cloth, careful as if it were her own flesh. Sewn into the lining, a slip of paper waited, worn and smudged. She passed it to him. "It's part of Halloway's ledger. The real one. It lists the people names, ages, where they came from, everything." Caleb's eyes scanned the cramped handwriting. At the top stood the words that had seared into his memory last night. "Silver Peak Mine, 187 souls." "There are more pages," Eveline whispered, locked in his office at the main shaft. "This is enough to raise questions, but not enough to end him. That's why they'll hunt me until I'm ash." Caleb folded the paper back, his hand steady. "You mean to get the rest? I have to. For them, not me." Her gaze met his, fierce despite her weakened frame. "You've lived without company. I understand if you don't want to be tangled in this, but I won't stop." Caleb leaned against the railing, staring at the jagged ridges. His life had been built on silence, on turning away from the echoes of war. But the brand of the 23rd Georgia tied her scars to his past, and fate did not feel like something he could ignore any longer. "You'll stay," he said finally. Her brows rose. "We." "You mean before he could finish?" Movement stirred at the far edge of the clearing. Caleb's body tensed. A rider was coming down the eastern trail, horse hooves slow and measured. "Inside," Caleb ordered. His voice was low, unyielding. Eveline slipped through the doorway without protest. Caleb remained on the porch, one hand on the railing, fingers brushing the hidden knife he always kept wedged in the wood. His rifle leaned just inside the cabin door. The rider drew closer, the outline sharpening through the morning haze. Caleb's eyes narrowed, his body still as stone. Whoever approached had come for more than a neighborly visit. And with that, Redstone Valley, his refuge for 12 long years, was no longer a place of silence. It had become a crossroads where the past, the present, and the fight Eveline carried in her blood were about to collide. The rider came into clear view as he guided his horse down the slope, the morning sun turning his copper-toned skin to bronze. His long black hair was tied back at the nape of his neck, the loose strands catching the wind like strands of raven feather. He wore a blend of two worlds, buckskin trousers, a blue cotton shirt faded from years of wear, and soft moccasins instead of boots. When his sharp eyes found Caleb Whitmore, he lifted one hand in a gesture that carried both respect and familiarity. Caleb's shoulders eased. "Jonah," he called, stepping off the porch. Jonah Blackthorne swung down from his horse with the effortless grace of a man born to the saddle. The ground seemed to welcome him rather than resist him. His voice was deep, carrying easily across the quiet clearing. "Caleb, been a while." "3 months," Caleb answered, meeting him halfway. The two men clasped forearms, a bond forged not of blood, but of years surviving the same land. Jonah's eyes flicked toward the cabin. His gaze sharpened, though there was no accusation in it, only observation. "You've got company. News always runs ahead of the horse," Caleb muttered. "Does." Jonah agreed, leading his horse to the trough near the cabin and letting the animal drink. His movements were steady, deliberate, the way of a man who thought before speaking. "They're searching," Jonah said after a beat. "Holloway's men. They're calling her a thief. Claim she stole from the mine office. They've got half the valley combed already." Caleb's brow furrowed. "You saw them." Jonah nodded. "More riders than usual. And they're waving coin around $50 for anyone who points the way." Caleb's jaw tightened. $50 was a fortune for most folks in the territory, enough to turn neighbors against one another. He studied Jonah. "How'd you know she was here?" A shadow of a smile touched Jonah's mouth. 12 years you've lived out here, and you still don't think I can read tracks I followed the prince. But I made sure no one else did." Caleb gave a sharp nod of thanks. "But that's not the only reason I came." Jonah's voice dropped lower. "Word is, Holloway's fixing to move the whole operation deeper into the mountains. He got wind that government inspectors are due next week. If he pulls up before then, those people vanish like smoke. No one will find them again." The sound of the cabin door creaking broke into their talk. Eveline Cross stepped outside, pale but standing, her body taut with pain and resolve. She looked from one man to the other. "I heard you." Jonah studied her, his dark eyes calm but penetrating. "You're the one they want." "Yes." Her chin lifted. "Eveline Cross." Jonah inclined his head. Jonah Blackthorne, friend of Caleb's. From the looks of it, his only friend. A flash of dry humor touched Eveline's lips. I figured as much. The corner of Jonah's mouth twitched. Caleb cleared his throat, uncomfortable with their quick exchange. Jonah knows these ridges better than anyone alive. His people walked them long before the rest of us came. My mother was Apache, Jonah said simply. My father a cavalry officer at Fort Whipple. I live between two worlds. It has its uses. Eveline nodded, understanding more than he said. Then, maybe you can help us reach the mine. Jonah arched a brow, shifting his gaze to Caleb. Caleb met his friend's eyes. The 23rd Georgia, he said, voice low. Understanding dawned in Jonah's expression. Holloway. Caleb gave a single nod. Jonah was silent for a long moment, weighing more than words. Finally, he said, there's an old tunnel, dug during the first silver rush, before Holloway's time. The mouth lies hidden in a dry wash about 2 miles from the compound. Few remember it. Fewer know it still stands. Does it reach the offices? Eveline asked quickly, hope sparking despite her weariness. Close enough, Jonah said. But getting in is one matter. Coming out alive is another. Holloway keeps 30 armed men, sometimes more, circling those grounds. They're mean with a rifle and quick with a trigger. You've got 7 days at most. Eveline looked between the two men, disbelief shading her features. Why are you helping me, either of you? You don't even know who I am. Jonah's eyes darkened. 3 years ago, my cousin went missing. Folks whispered he'd run. Last month, I found his bones in a ravine not 5 miles from Silver Peak. His back bore Holloway's mark. That's reason enough. Her face softened, sympathy flickering. I'm sorry. Jonah gave a slight nod, then looked to Caleb. And you, Caleb, stiffened. Words hard to find. For years he had kept the past buried under stone and silence. But Eveline deserved to know who she had drawn into her cause. I fought with the Union, Caleb said finally. His voice was flat, stripped of pretense. After. I worked with the Freedmen's Bureau in Tennessee. Helped folks build towns. Schools. A place called Redstone Valley once stood, full of people who'd clawed their freedom out of blood and fire. His jaw clenched. Then the 23rd Georgia Battalion came. Holloway's men. They burned it. Slaughtered everyone they could lay hands on. Men, women, children. The words cracked something in the silence. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying with it the smell of sage and dust. There was a woman, Caleb continued, voice rasping. Her name was Clara. She tried to shield her child. She died in my arms. That day, he broke off, swallowing hard. Eveline's breath caught. What about the child I searched through smoke and ruin? Caleb admitted. Never found her. I've prayed she lived, but I'll never know. He straightened, forcing the ghosts back where they belonged. That was another life. But this might be a chance to do what I couldn't then. Silence hung heavy among them. Eveline's eyes glistened with unshed tears, though she spoke firmly. Thank you for telling me, for not turning away. Jonah exhaled slowly, breaking the weight. I'll return tomorrow with more about the tunnel, patrol routes, shifts, what you'll need to know if you're fool enough to try. He swung into the saddle again. Caleb stepped close. Be careful. They know you've guided runaways before. A grim smile tugged at Jonah's lips. If they come looking, the hills will swallow them. They always do. He tipped his head to Eveline, then nudged his horse into a trot, vanishing among the trees. Caleb and Eveline stood side by side until the sound of hooves faded. The sun had risen higher now, shadows shrinking across the clearing. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry slicing through the stillness. You should rest, Caleb said, finally turning to her. You're not healed yet. 7 days isn't long, she murmured, her gaze still fixed on the path Jonah had taken. It's enough, he told her, though doubt gnawed at the edge of his certainty. Come inside. They returned to the cabin together. For 12 years, the walls had stood as Caleb's fortress against the world. Now, with Eveline's presence, the silence was altered. The air felt less like solitude, more like waiting. She eased herself onto the bed, fatigue pulling at her, though her spirit burned bright still. Caleb busied himself at the stove, stirring beans and setting cornbread by the fire. After a long silence, Eveline's voice came soft. "Clara," she said, almost to herself. "You said she died with her child. How old was the girl?" Caleb blinked, surprised. 4, maybe 5. Eveline's eyes clouded with thought, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the blanket. "Some stories follow you," she whispered, "no matter how far you run." Caleb nodded, adding another stick of wood to the stove. "That they do." Soon her breathing deepened, surrendering to exhausted sleep. Caleb sat at the table, staring into the firelight. He told himself he was planning, measuring risks, weighing options. But beneath it all, old memories stirred, memories of smoke, screams, and a child's cry swallowed by flames, and for the first time in years he did not feel alone. The Silver Peak mine had the look of a fortress, and in truth it was one: high fences, armed men at every gate, and officials in town who turned their eyes away in exchange for bribes and promises. No outsider had ever brought back proof of what Victor Halloway was doing inside. And yet, as Caleb Whitmore studied the pale figure sleeping in his bed, he felt something stir within him that had been absent for years. Purpose. For too long he had simply existed, chopping wood, tending traps, letting days pass like shadows. The ghosts of Redstone Valley still haunted him, faces he could not save, fires he could not quench. Now fate had pushed a wounded stranger onto his path, carrying scars that bore the very mark of his enemy. Perhaps this was no accident. Perhaps it was the reckoning he had run from. The afternoon dragged by quietly. Eveline Cross slept soundly, her body claiming the rest it had been denied for too long. Caleb kept himself busy, hauling water, stacking firewood, sharpening tools, though his eyes often drifted toward the trail that led down into the valley. He half expected to see riders appear at any moment. When she finally woke, the light was fading, long shadows slanting across the cabin floor. Caleb helped her to the table, setting before her a bowl of stew thick with beans and smoked venison. They ate in silence, the kind of silence that was not heavy, but companionable. Caleb was a man of few words, and Eveline seemed to understand that words were not always needed. When the meal was finished, he lit the oil lamp and set it between them. The soft glow carved out a circle of safety, holding back the night, pressing in from outside. "Tell me about the camp," Caleb said at last. His tone was steady, but his jaw was tight. How many? Eveline set down her spoon. Her appetite had faded, replaced by the weight of memory. 187, last I counted. Men, women, even children. Most are freedmen or immigrants promised wages and land. Some are wanderers who made the mistake of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Caleb's hands curled around his coffee mug. "And you? How'd you end up there for a moment?" Shadows crossed her face. She hesitated, then met his eyes. "I was looking for something, for someone, for answers about Redstone Valley and about the 23rd Georgia Battalion." Her voice lowered. "About Clara." Caleb froze. The name hit him like a fist. His grip tightened around the mug until he thought it might shatter. He opened his mouth, But before he could speak, a sharp crack echoed outside, a branch snapping, too loud, too deliberate. Caleb was on his feet in an instant. He leaned over the lamp and blew out the flame, plunging the cabin into darkness. He slipped to the window, pressing himself to the wall as he peered out into the night. Eveline stayed at the table, hardly breathing, her eyes wide. "What is it?" she whispered. Caleb lifted a finger to his lips. The silence outside was unnatural. No chirp of crickets, no rustle of night birds. The forest had stilled, as if holding its breath. Someone was out there. He reached for the rifle propped by the door, checked the chamber, then leaned close to Eveline. His voice was low, a growl more than a whisper. "Stay here. If things turn bad, there's a trapdoor under the rug. It leads to the root cellar. Hide there." Before she could answer, he was already moving, sliding through the door and onto the porch. The night air was cool, the pine scent sharp in his lungs. Beneath it, he caught another smell smoke, not the sharp tang of a fire, but the faint, bitter trace of tobacco. Someone was watching, keeping low. Caleb circled the cabin, his boots silent on the earth. His years of solitude had sharpened his instincts to a hunter's edge. He felt the disturbance in the rhythm of the woods, there at the tree line. A faint glow, the ember of a cigarette hastily snuffed. He set his rifle against the trunk of a nearby tree and drew the hunting knife from his belt. Quiet as a wolf, he crept closer. The figure was crouched near the pines, a spyglass trained on the dark cabin, wide-brimmed hat, pistol at his side. A scout. Caleb moved the last 3 steps in silence. In one swift motion, he clamped a hand over the man's mouth and pressed the knife blade to his throat. "Don't move," Caleb hissed against the man's ear. "Don't make a sound." The body went rigid, a tremor running through it. Caleb could feel the man's pulse hammering beneath the blade. "I'll ask questions. You nod or shake your head." "Understand." The man gave a jerky nod. "You alone." A nod. "Here for the woman." Another nod. "More men coming." A pause, then a reluctant nod. Caleb eased the hand from his mouth but kept the knife close enough that the man felt the cold kiss of steel with every breath. "Whisper," Caleb ordered. "Dawn," the scout rasped. "Blackwood's bringing 6 men, told me to confirm she was here first." Caleb's gut tightened. Elias Blackwood, Halloway's right hand, the one who seared the brands into flesh. Does Halloway know for certain she's here? The scout swallowed hard. Not yet, but he suspects. Said if anyone was fool enough to shelter her, it'd be you. Said you two had history. So Halloway remembered him. After all these years, the past was not buried after all. The scout's voice cracked. "Please, I've got a family. This is just a job hunting people like animals." Caleb growled. "I don't work the mine," the man whispered. "Only scout, sometimes, when they need extra eyes." Caleb weighed his options. If he killed him, the silence of a missing scout would raise alarm. If he let him go, they would be overrun at dawn. "Listen close," Caleb said, his tone low and sharp as broken glass. "You're leaving these hills tonight. You'll tell Blackwood the trail's cold. Say she went north, toward the border. You ever come within 5 miles of my land again, you won't walk out alive. I'll know if you try." The man nodded frantically. "I understand. I swear." Caleb pulled the knife away and shoved him forward. The scout stumbled, gasped for air, then bolted into the trees without a backward glance. Caleb retrieved his rifle and returned to the cabin. Eveline stood at the door, a kitchen knife trembling in her hand. Relief flooded her face when she saw him. "What happened?" she asked, her voice thin. "Scout," Caleb said, securing the door behind him. "Checking if you were here. The others come at dawn." Her face went pale. "Did you kill him?" "No. Sent him off with false tracks, but it won't hold long." He raked a hand through his graying hair, every line of his face etched with tension. "We need to move tonight, where I've got a place higher up. Old trapper's cabin I use in winter. 4 miles. Rough ground." Her jaw clenched. "I'll make it." He looked at her, seeing the raw determination burning beneath the pain. He gave a short nod. "Pack light. Just what we need." They moved quickly, gathering food, ammunition, blankets, the precious ledger page tucked safe against Eveline's chest. Caleb doused the fire, scattered the ashes, and stripped the cabin of anything that would reveal life within. An hour later, they slipped out the back into the night. The stars blazed above, cold and sharp. The forest rose around them, black shapes against the sky. Caleb led, rifle in hand, Eveline close behind. For 12 years, he had hidden from war. Tonight, war had found him again, and as he guided Eveline into the dark hills, he knew one truth burned brighter than fear. There would be no running this time. The climb through the night was harder on Eveline Cross than either of them wanted to admit. Caleb Whitmore slowed the pace at every steep rise, pausing often so she could catch her breath. She never once complained, though he could read the strain in the set of her jaw and the trembling of her legs. Her grit impressed him. Most wounded folks would have begged to stop. Eveline simply pressed on, clutching the pouch at her waist where the precious paper was hidden. At one point, as they rested against a fallen log, she asked in a near whisper, "We're being followed, aren't we?" Caleb scanned the forest, ears tuned to the smallest crack of twig or shift of wind. He gave a curt nod. That scout didn't buy my bluff. Or maybe he feared Blackwood more than he feared me. Either way, he'll have men on our trail at first light. Her hand drifted to the pouch. "If they catch us, they won't." Caleb cut in, his tone hard enough to silence doubt. "Not while I'm breathing." They pushed higher, the path steepening as the eastern sky softened with hints of dawn. At last, they reached a ledge where stone walls curved into a hidden plateau. Tucked against the cliff stood a weathered shack of gray logs, almost camouflaged against the rock. The old trapper's cabin. Caleb ushered her inside and barred the door. The place was small but sturdy, a stone hearth, shelves lined with jars of dried beans and jerky, a cot tucked against the far wall. He built a fire no larger than a fist, careful to keep smoke to a minimum. "Rest," he told her, pointing to the cot. "We're safe enough for now." She sank onto the narrow bed, her face pale with exhaustion. "Wake me if anything happens." "I will." Caleb took his rifle and stationed himself at the single window, eyes sweeping the valley below. The first rays of sun brushed the ridges, revealing an endless wilderness scarred only by distant trails. Somewhere out there, Victor Halloway's men were already moving. And beyond them, inside the Silver Peak mine, nearly 200 souls labored in chains. Their hope now rested with a broken soldier and a woman who had already endured more than most could bear. 7 days. That was all the time left before Halloway shifted his operations deeper into Arizona territory, scattering the prisoners and covering his crimes. 7 days to slip into a fortress, gather proof, and somehow lead the captives out. It was madness. Yet Caleb felt no hesitation. For the first time in 12 long years, he had something worth risking his life for. The day crawled by, heavy and slow. He kept his post at the window, breaking only to tend Eveline as fever crept back into her body. He cooled her brow with damp cloths and coaxed her to sip water, though her strength waned with every passing hour. The Arizona sun blazed against the cliff, turning the cabin into a stifling oven despite its thick walls. By mid-afternoon, Caleb spotted movement in the distance. Small parties of riders, combing the lower ridges, 2 groups, working methodically. Calloway hadn't wasted time. These weren't mere hired guns, they were seasoned trackers, hunters who knew how to follow faint signs through unforgiving country. Eveline stirred awake, her gaze drifting to the window. "They're coming," she murmured. It wasn't a question. "Not yet," Caleb replied, though he didn't take his eyes off the valley. "But they will." She pushed herself upright, grimacing at the pull of half-healed wounds. "How long before they find us, if we're lucky? Not before dark." His voice trailed off, heavy with what he didn't say. She nodded, understanding. "And then we move again. There are caves farther up, places only Jonah and I know." Eveline's brow furrowed. "We can't keep running forever." "No," he admitted. "We can't." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Eveline studied him from her place on the cot. She saw the lines carved deep in his face, the haunted look of a man who had carried grief too long. "You've been hiding for 12 years, she said softly, "since Redstone Valley." His jaw tightened. "Not hiding, waiting. Is there a difference?" He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his eyes wavered. "Running means you've given up. Hiding means you're still waiting for the moment to strike." She weighed his words carefully. "And now, are you ready to strike?" Before Caleb could answer, a distant crack split the air, the faint report of a rifle. Another shot followed. He was at the window instantly, scanning the slopes. "What is it?" Eveline asked, tension in her voice. "Signals," he muttered. "They found something." The hours dragged as he watched the searchers move. He read their progress by the ripple of disturbed birds, by glints of sun on rifle barrels, by faint shouts carried on the wind. They were converging north of the plateau, closing on a false trail. "They've lost us," Caleb said at last, a thread of relief in his tone. "Something's drawn them away." Eveline eased to his side, careful to stay back from the light. "Jonah," she suggested. "He knows these hills better than most." Caleb allowed himself the smallest nod. Maybe. With the threat shifting elsewhere, he built the fire just enough to heat water. The familiar ritual steadied him, measuring out the grounds, pouring slowly, letting the scent of coffee fill the small space. Eveline watched him, her voice quiet but firm. "You never answered me, Caleb. Are you ready to fight?" He set the pot on the hearthstone. "I've been fighting ghosts for 12 years. Maybe it's time to face the man who made them." "Calloway," she said, naming him like a curse. "Calloway," Caleb confirmed, "and men like him, men who think power gives them the right to chain others, men who burned out Redstone Valley." Her gaze softened, seeing the pain those words carried. The war was supposed to end that. Caleb's expression turned distant. "I thought it had. Then I came on that valley burning. Families who wanted nothing but to plant roots, raise children. I can still see the gardens, trampled under boots. And Clara." His voice broke. Clara was just a girl herself, clutching her daughter, begging me to save her. She bled out in my arms before I could move her to safety. Eveline's eyes brimmed. "And the child I searched until smoke blinded me," Caleb whispered. "Never found her. I don't know if she lived or if Calloway's men took her." His face hardened. "That's the ghost I carry." The coffee boiled. He poured 2 cups, handed one to Eveline. She took it with trembling hands, cradling the warmth like a lifeline. The searchers were still out there. The mine still held its prisoners. Calloway still breathed, But inside that tiny shack, with dawn behind them and the long night ahead, two weary souls found in each other a flicker of resolve. This time, Caleb thought, he would not fail. Caleb sat with the map spread across the table, the oil lamp throwing a steady circle of light. Jonah had drawn the mine compound in a rough hand, but every mark meant something. Caleb traced the route with a finger as if he could feel the stones beneath the paper. Eveline watched him, the ledger tucked close to her chest like a secret heartbeat. Outside the cabin, the night settled in. The world narrowed down to 3 people and a plan that had to be perfect. Time had shrunk to a single hard measure. What had once been 7 days was now 3. Victor Halloway had accelerated his timetable after hearing a whisper in Prescott. He intended to move his workforce deeper into the territory and out of reach of any inspector or righteous sheriff. That would scatter the proof and erase chances to free the men and women trapped under his name. Caleb tightened his jaw. He had lived a long while with guilt and distance, but guilt could be turned into purpose. If they failed to act now, the ledger would mean nothing, and those souls would be lost deeper in the wheels of merciless profit. Jonah poured coffee without a fuss and sat cross-legged on the floor. He spoke plainly. We need a messenger, someone fast who can ride to Prescott and make contact with Sheriff Edgar Sullivan. I can run if you want, he offered, but his eyes said he had other reasons to stay. We both know that path better than most. He tapped the map where the trail crossed the river. The run to Prescott is dangerous and long, but doable. If the sheriff arrives with deputies quickly, they can move in with authority, not just righteous anger. Eveline shook her head. You take the ledger to him, she said. You have the face they expect to bring news. Caleb felt the weight of that suggestion settle on him like a hand. The ledger was the key, and if anyone could convince the law, it would be someone who could speak plainly and who could stand before men who would otherwise be tempted by Halloway's money. Jonah looked at Caleb. You kept to these hills for a reason. You know the ways. I will go with you to Prescott if you go. He did not ask. He made the offer and set the terms. Caleb felt something like relief. He was not as young as he once had been, but he still remembered how to walk a trail at night and how to make a message carry through a town that took bribes. They worked until the lamp burned low. They set rolls and backups. Eveline would stay hidden until the last safe moment. She was the one who would get into Halloway's office and take the ledger. She knew the safe combination and the layout of the inner office better than anyone awake in the valley. Jonah would ride for Prescott with a letter prepared by Caleb that laid out the evidence and begged immediate action. If Jonah could not move fast enough, Caleb would consider making the run himself. The plan favored speed and the assumption that Sullivan would come. They prepared provisions, wrapped the ledger in oilcloth, and made a small satchel of bandages and food. Jonah checked saddles and counted cartridges. Caleb tested the old travel map, aligning it with Jonah's notes, and the white stones, Jonah said, marked the hidden tunnel entrance. Eveline practiced the motions she would need to open a safe under pressure. Her hands were steady now in a way they had not been when he first found her. She turned the imaginary dial with quiet determination until her fingers moved like memory rather than fear. There was still much that could go wrong. Blackwood, Halloway's foreman, would not sit idle. The scout who slunk away earlier could have told a story that sent every hired hand in the valley in search of the cabin. There were places where the trail narrowed into a trap and times when horses could not keep pace. But there was also a truth they had to write on. Once the ledger reached a lawman with a spine, they could use the machinery of the territory. The ledger in a Deputy S hand mattered more than one more firefight among desperate people. Caleb found a quiet moment later and stepped outside. The sky had cleared, and the stars were sharp as knives. He looked at the ridge where Redstone Valley lay, hidden beyond the folds of rock, and thought about Clara and the decades that had passed in a blur of ash and regret. He had failed then, and now the truth slid back into his hands like a chance at repair. He wished for nothing dramatic. All he wanted was to fix what he could and to do right by the promise he had failed to keep 12 years ago. When he returned inside, Jonah had finished writing a short, blunt letter for the sheriff. It listed names, dates, and the fact that the ledger would be delivered and that arrests would be required to stop the movement of people. That style fit Jonah. He was not one to gild a claim. He asked for a telegraph or for a quick ride with deputies if possible. They folded the letter small and tucked it into a leather case. Eveline spoke up then and said something Caleb had been waiting for. She would not be content with hiding while others risked themselves on her behalf. If they could free the ledger, she would go in with Caleb and Jonah and make sure the evidence was secured. No one else could move in the office like she could, she said. There is no other to get the combination and the clerk's schedule. Holloway trusts his house staff, and that trust will be our way in. Jonah and Caleb both understood the danger. The tight rooms of an office held hiding places where a gun could be produced, and a single candle could give away a hand faster than a shout. They refined the plan so that stealth came first. Jonah would create a diversion for the night of the break-in. He would set false tracks and use signals that only Caleb recognized. Caleb would move through the tunnel and take the lead to the outer office. Eveline would slip in when guards were counted and the outer office was quiet. They would have no more than the night to open the safe and leave. They practiced the hand signals until they felt awkward, and then they practiced a little more. They marked the white stones Jonah had described on the back of the map with a small cross and a note to be sure no one else would miss the marker. Everyone understood that if Holloway moved the prisoners before the ledger left the valley, then everything could fail. The next day was a blur of preparation and farewell. Jonah packed the fastest horse he could borrow. Caleb checked the old rifle and cleaned it carefully, setting it within reach. Eveline tucked the ledger piece into the inner fold of her shirt and tried to think of nothing but steady breaths. They left the cabin in a silence that felt like an oath. Jonah rode out before dawn, and the first light carved the hills into bands of gold and brown. He promised to cross the Verde River, to take the high trails past the scrub, and to avoid the main roads where a man with his face might be stopped and questioned. He clapped Caleb a shoulder with a hand that was both gentle and firm. "Be careful," he said. "Don't let pride or guilt fool you into unnecessary risks. Remember, the ledger is everything." Caleb watched him go until the horse-ass dust vanished into the air. Then he turned back to Eveline. "We will go tonight," he said, "when the first stars show." She nodded, and the two of them sat for a long time in the quiet, talking about small things so that fear did not fill all the air. They spoke of the smell of coffee in the morning, of simple pleasures that felt like impossible luxuries in the middle of this. They spoke of how much they wanted people to be alive and free. When night came, they packed their gear and moved toward the tunnel entrance Jonah had indicated. The path was less traveled than any road and more honest for that. Caleb led with steady steps. Eveline followed close as the ledger thudded against her ribs like a second heart. The hills closed around them, and for a moment the world narrowed to the flash of their lantern and the soft sound of their breathing in the dark. They were not naive. They were ashamed at times of the violence they might have to do. But they had chosen a path, and once chosen, they would follow it to the end. The ledger was not only pages and ink. It was names and futures and little hands that deserved a chance to grow. If they succeeded, the ledger would mean new lives. If they failed, many would be crushed. Caleb thought of Clara and the child she held and felt the old scars pulse. He turned to Eveline and found in her eyes a steady resolve that matched his own. "We go," he said simply. Eveline nodded, and they moved into the night. The moment Eveline asked about the law, her voice carried both hope and doubt. She leaned forward, her hands tightening around the tin cup as if bracing for an answer she already feared. Caleb and Jonah exchanged a heavy glance before Jonah finally spoke. His tone was calm, but the weight of truth was unmistakable. "Marshal Davis has been in Holloway's pocket for years," Jonah said. "That is why no one dares to investigate what happened at Redstone Valley or why the disappearances near Silver Peak keep piling up. He looks the other way because his purse is always full." Eveline's jaw tightened. "So we stand alone?" "Not entirely." Caleb cut in, his mind already working through the possibilities. "There is one man I trust. Edgar Sullivan. He fought beside me during the war and now serves as sheriff in Yavapai County. He cannot be bought. If we can place the ledger in his hands, he will bring the law down on Holloway, no matter who protects him." Jonah studied Caleb's face with a slow nod. "And you think Sullivan can reach us in time?" "He can," Caleb replied firmly. "But only if we move tonight. I'll write a letter that carries the truth, but keeps us safe if it falls into the wrong hands. If you can get it to Prescott by tomorrow night, he could ride out with deputies the following day." Jonah considered the journey, mentally calculating trails and distances. "It will take 30 miles through mountain cuts. Hard riding, but I know every pass and ridge. I can make it. Still, that leaves you two to get the ledger." Eveline's voice was steady. "And to stop Holloway from moving the people before Sheriff Sullivan arrives." Caleb leaned over the map once again, the firelight casting long shadows across his face. "Then we strike tomorrow night, just the two of us inside. Jonah, you'll be worth more riding for Sullivan, guiding him back. If we succeed, the law will be waiting. If we fail..." His voice trailed, but the silence spoke louder than words. The three of them bent close to the table, whispering strategy into the night. Each detail mattered. Guard rotations, the tunnel entrance, the hidden safe. They spoke of escape routes, false signals, and silent signs that would mean life or death. When dawn finally broke over the Arizona hills, the plan was sealed like an oath carved in stone. Outside the cabin, Jonah mounted his horse, his dark hair catching the morning light. Caleb clasped his arm tightly. "Ride safe. We'll meet you at the ridge 2 days from now." Jonah's eyes glimmered with a quiet fire. "May the spirits guide your path, and may they blind the eyes of your enemies." He turned his horse and gave a final nod to Eveline, who watched from the doorway. Then he disappeared into the mist, curling along the high slopes. Caleb lingered a moment, staring into the thinning fog before returning inside. "We should rest while we can. Tonight will test us both." The hours passed in quiet preparation. Caleb cleaned and loaded the rifle, checked the revolver Jonah had left behind, and strapped the hunting knife to his belt. Eveline sat at the small table, practicing the safe combination on a small lockbox until her fingers moved with instinctive confidence. Over and over, she spun the dial, listening for the faint clicks, her jaw set with determination. By afternoon, Caleb found himself drawn to the cabin window. The Arizona landscape stretched endless before him, the red hills and scattered mesquite glowing beneath the sun. It was a harsh land, wild and unforgiving, yet it held a freedom he had never found among men. He felt Eveline step beside him, her presence quiet but undeniable. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I can see why you chose this place." Caleb nodded slowly. After Redstone Valley, I could not face the world. People's faces reminded me of those I failed to save, but the land, it does not judge. It only asks you to endure. And after tonight, Eveline asked softly, "If we succeed, will you return to this solitude?" The question caught him unprepared. For 12 years, he had lived only for survival, his heart buried beneath grief. Now she was asking about a future he had never allowed himself to imagine. "I do not know," he admitted. "Perhaps I have forgotten there is more to life than these hills. Or perhaps," Eveline finished for him, "you have remembered at last." He turned toward her, startled by the strength in her gaze. She looked nothing like the weary prisoner he had rescued. Though scars lingered, her eyes now burned with resilience and an unshakable will. She was no longer a victim, but a woman reclaiming her life. "What about you?" he asked quietly. "When this is over, where will you go?" Her expression softened. "I have spent years chasing shadows, looking backward, demanding justice. Perhaps tomorrow I will find a reason to look forward. That may be the gift waiting on the other side." As the sun began its descent, they dressed in dark clothing suited for the night ahead. Eveline bound her hair beneath a cap and smudged her face with ash from the hearth. Caleb checked their weapons one final time, then studied Jonah's map until every detail was etched in his mind. Before leaving, he caught Eveline's arm, his voice stern. "If we get separated, go to the ridge. Do not wait for me. Do not come back for me. Take the ledger and run." "I will not leave you," she answered firmly. "You might have to," he countered. "The lives of those people matter more than mine. Promise me." Eveline's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. "Then promise me the same. If I am caught, you must carry the ledger out. Promise." Caleb held her gaze for a long moment, then bowed his head. "I promise." They slipped into the night as the last light faded, their steps careful on the rocky trail. The moon hung bright, casting silver across the hills, both a guide and a danger. For 3 long hours they traveled, silence their only companion, until the faint glow of lanterns marked the Silver Peak compound below. From their perch on a rocky ledge, they could see guards moving in precise patterns, rifles glinting under lantern light. Smoke curled from the processing building, never quiet, never fully asleep. The hum of industry carried faintly on the night air, mingling with the low murmur of voices and the occasional bark of a foreman. Caleb motioned for Eveline to follow as he slid down toward the dry wash Jonah had described. There, hidden behind a cluster of stones, lay the entrance to the forgotten tunnel. Jonah's markers, 3 small white stones carefully arranged, were visible only to those who knew to seek them. Caleb brushed them aside, revealing a narrow opening cut into the earth. He slipped inside first, his body swallowed by darkness, then turned to help Eveline through. Once inside, he replaced the stones, sealing their passage from any curious eyes. The air was stale, heavy with the damp scent of rotting timbers. The passage forced them to crouch, their hands scraping rough walls as they moved. Caleb struck a match, its glow revealing wooden beams warped with age and streaks of moisture along the ceiling. Small creatures darted into shadows at the sudden flare. "Stay close," he whispered, blowing out the flame after memorizing the way. The tunnel runs straight for 200 yards, then splits. "We take the right." They pressed forward in near darkness, their hands brushing stone, their breaths steady and controlled. The silence was broken only by the drip of water and the crunch of their boots against loose gravel. Each step carried them deeper toward danger, yet also closer to justice for Redstone Valley and the captives of Silver Peak. The weight of what lay ahead pressed on them both, but neither faltered. Whatever waited beyond the tunnel, they would face it together. The tunnel closed behind them with a muffled finality, as if the earth itself wanted no part in their mission. Eveline pressed forward, forcing her body to accept the narrow confines. The stale air clawed at her throat, and the weight of stone above seemed to squeeze her chest. Fear pressed in with every step, but she clung to the memory of her mother's voice and the promise she had made to Caleb. On the far side lay hope, and she would not falter. After what felt like endless minutes in the dark, they reached the end of the passage. A pale shaft of moonlight filtered through a slatted barrier. Caleb crouched low, ear to the boards, listening for movement outside. Satisfied that no patrol lingered nearby, he worked quietly, easing each plank aside and setting it down without a sound. Together they slipped into the night, crouching behind the shadow of a storage shed. Just as Jonah had promised, the administrative building stood 50 yards ahead, its windows black save for one faint glow deep inside. "That has to be Holloway's office," Caleb whispered. Eveline nodded, her eyes locked on the distant light. "Then that is where we go." The compound bustled with order even in darkness. Guards traced rigid lines past lanterns spaced with military precision. Caleb checked his pocket watch and counted the rhythm. "We have 12 minutes before the next man passes this way, another 15 before the following patrol. That is our window." "Plenty," Eveline said, though her heart thumped wildly. They slid from cover when the nearest guard turned his back. Keeping low, they darted between shadows, hugging the walls of low buildings and slipping across open stretches like ghosts. Caleb moved with the practiced ease of a man who had spent years stalking game and evading enemies in wilderness. Eveline mirrored his steps, careful to place her feet exactly where he had placed his. In silence, they reached the back of the administrative office. The lock on the rear door was no match for Caleb's skill. Jonah's slender picks gleamed once in the moonlight before disappearing into the mechanism. Within moments, the door eased open with a whisper of metal. Inside, darkness swallowed them whole, except for a line of amber light glowing beneath a door at the far end of the hall. The lamp in Holloway's inner chamber. They crept forward, testing each floorboard, shifting their weight slowly to keep the wood from groaning. At the outer office door, Caleb tried the handle. It turned without resistance. They entered and closed it softly behind them. The room was neat, filing cabinets lining the wall, a clerk's desk stationed like a barrier before the inner sanctum. At the far side, a heavy oak door waited, its brass plate glinting faintly with the name V. Holloway. "Clear," Caleb murmured after scanning the window. "But we do not have long." Eveline approached the oak door, her palms damp with sweat. She pressed her ear against it. No sound. She tried the handle. Locked. Caleb knelt quickly, tools in hand. This lock was sturdier than the one outside, but he worked with the patience of long practice. His weathered hands moved with the delicacy of a craftsman listening to tumblers fall. A final click, and the bolt released. The door swung inward. Holloway's office reflected his vanity. The mahogany desk gleamed with polish. Leather chairs sat arranged in calculated authority. Maps of the Arizona Territory covered one wall, red pins scattered like wounds marking places of interest. A silver tray with whiskey glasses rested nearby, as if power itself were meant to be toasted. Eveline's eyes found what she sought immediately. Above the desk hung a painting of Pickett's charge, its inaccuracies ignored for the sake of pride. Behind it lay the safe. "Watch the window," she whispered. Caleb obeyed, taking up position, eyes scanning the compound for movement. Eveline lifted the painting with steady hands and set it aside. Her fingers moved to the dial. She had practiced this moment until the numbers lived in her bones. Right, left, right again. The tumblers clicked softly. and the door eased open. Inside lay bundles of papers, loose currency, and at the center a small book bound in dark leather. Eveline drew it out with trembling fingers, opened it, and confirmed what she already knew. Halloway's ledger. The columns of names and dates sprawled across the pages like grave markers. Lives reduced to lines of ink. Each number a testimony of stolen freedom. Her stomach turned as she found the entry she carried, the list of 187 souls at Silver Peak. She slid the book beneath her blouse and closed the safe, replacing the painting. Then Caleb stiffened at the window, his voice cut low and sharp. "Someone is coming, not patrols, straight for this building." Eveline's blood went cold. She saw two shadows moving with intent across the compound. They had less than a minute. Caleb's eyes darted across the room, calculating. There was no back exit, no time to reach the tunnel. "Hide," he ordered. "I will draw them away." Before she could argue, he guided her toward a tall cabinet in the corner. "Remember what you promised. If I fall, you run with the ledger." Her lips parted to protest, but his hand pressed gently against her arm. The look in his eyes left no room for debate. She slipped into the cabinet, leaving a crack just wide enough to see. Caleb closed Halloway's door behind him and stepped into the clerk's office. Moments later, the main door opened. Heavy boots thudded across the wooden floor. Voices murmured low, one sharp, one doubtful. Then Caleb's voice rang out, altered beyond recognition. He slurred his words like a man deep in whiskey. "Evening, gents. Fine night for a drink." Don't you think the room fell silent? Then a hard voice cut through. "Who the hell are you? How'd you get in here?" "Name's Collins," Caleb said, adopting a southern drawl. "New guard. Captain Blackwood said I could help myself if I finished my rounds early." Door was open, so I figured it was all right. "There's no guard named Collins," the second man snapped, "and this building's off limits to anyone but Mr. Halloway." Caleb chuckled, scratching his neck as though embarrassed. "Well, I'll be damned. Must have misunderstood. Long day. You know how it is. I'll just be on my way." Through the crack, Eveline could see him backing toward the entrance, hands lifted in mock surrender. Two guards blocked his path, suspicion etched on their faces. One rested his hand on the butt of his revolver. "You're not leaving," the first guard said coldly. "Blackwood will want to hear about this. Now, boys, no need for trouble." Caleb replied, "Just a simple mistake. Still learning the ropes." "Shut your mouth," barked the other guard, drawing his weapon. "Hands where I can see them. You're coming with us." Eveline's chest tightened. For a heartbeat, she thought Caleb might allow himself to be taken, buying her time. Then she saw the subtle shift in his stance, the weight rolling to the balls of his feet. She recognized the moment when survival instinct fused with decision. The guard's revolver rose. Caleb lunged, knocking the man's arm skyward just as the trigger pulled. The shot cracked through the ceiling, splinters showering down. The second guard cursed, drawing his own weapon, but Caleb was already moving, driving his shoulder into the first man's chest, sending him sprawling into the desk. The lamp toppled, flickering violently. The room exploded into chaos. Eveline pressed against the crack of the cabinet, her nails digging into the wood. She knew that whatever happened next would determine not only their fate, but the lives of every captive waiting in the depths of Silver Peak. Caleb Whitmore moved like a man who had lived half his life in shadows. His fist shot upward in a brutal arc, smashing into the guard's throat. The man dropped instantly, choking on the night air, eyes wide in shock. Another guard ripped his revolver free, but Caleb was already upon him, his roughened hands locking around the weapon. Both men slammed into the clerk's desk, papers scattering into the smoky air. The gun thundered once, deafening in the confined room. For a heartbeat, everything froze, even time itself. Then the guard staggered backward, a spreading stain across his chest, before crumpling lifeless to the floor. Caleb straightened, revolver now in his grasp. His breath came hard, though his eyes burned steady, fierce. From the crack of the cabinet door, he caught sight of Eveline Cross's wide, frightened gaze. His lips shaped a silent word. "Go." Eveline burst from the cabinet as shouts rang through the compound. Gunfire had not gone unnoticed. Lanterns bobbed outside the administrative office, boots hammering closer. "Not without you," she hissed, her resolve unshaken. Caleb shook his head sharply and gestured downward. Only then did Eveline see the truth, the torn fabric above his knee, blood flowing fast. One bullet had found its mark. "I'll slow you down," he rasped, jaw tight with pain. "The ledger's what matters. Get to the rendezvous. Jonah and Sullivan will be there. I'll hold them back long enough to buy you a chance." Her heart twisted. She wanted to argue, to refuse, but his eyes burned with finality. Instead, Eveline slipped something into his palm, the torn fragment she had hidden away since her first desperate escape. "In case they take the book," she whispered fiercely. "At least Sullivan will have this." Her lips brushed his cheek, fleeting but filled with fire. "Stay alive. Caleb, I didn't fight all these years just to lose you now." Then she was gone, swallowed by the night. Caleb checked the cylinder of his revolver, 4 rounds left. He positioned himself where he could cover both doors, shoulders squared against the inevitable. He wasn't making this stand for himself. He was doing it for a promise made too late, and for the child of a woman who had died in his arms so long ago. Gunfire exploded as the first guards burst inside. Caleb steadied his breath. Eveline Cross sprinted through the compound, heart thundering in her chest. Behind her came the rattle of shots, Caleb buying her time with his blood. Every part of her screamed to turn back, but she forced herself forward, clutching the ledger against her ribs like a lifeline. She slipped into the old storage shed, pried loose the boards, and ducked into the tunnel hidden beneath. Darkness closed around her, suffocating, disorienting. She pressed her hand along the wall, each step a battle against panic. Follow the wall, right fork, 200 yards. Caleb's words echoed in her mind. Time lost meaning. Her world shrank to darkness, rough stone beneath her fingertips, the hammer of her pulse in her ears. Every second stretched like an eternity, each step carrying the weight of a man's sacrifice. When she finally stumbled into the night, moonlight washed over her like salvation. She paused, chest heaving, listening for pursuit. Lanterns scattered across the mining yard, voices shouting, men searching. In the distance, faint and scattered, gunfire still cracked. Her breath caught. Caleb was still fighting. Forcing the thought aside, she turned east. The meeting point waited at a hunting cabin on the banks of the Redstone River, 15 miles through rough country. Jonah Blackthorne would be there. So would Sheriff Sullivan, if fate allowed. Eveline knew better than to trust plans. Life had rarely honored them. She pressed on, hugging the shadows, slipping across ravines and through patches of scrub pine. 5 miles in, the sound she dreaded reached her ears, the pounding of hooves, closing fast. Victor Halloway's men. Her legs burned. She pushed harder, but horses would always win over flesh and bone. Blood from half-healed wounds dampened her shirt. Each breath felt stolen. She scanned the land wildly, seeking escape. Then she saw it a rocky outcrop, jagged and narrow, splitting into a ravine too tight for mounts. She hurled herself toward it, scraping her shoulders raw as she slipped inside. The walls closed around her, carved smooth by ancient floods. The air smelled of damp earth and stone. She pressed flat against the wall, willing her breath to silence. The riders halted outside, their voices carried, cruel and confident. "Tracks lead this way," one drawled. "Victor wants her alive," another answered. And the man, a harsh laugh. Not a problem anymore. Took 6 bullets before he went down. Killed 4 of ours first. Eveline's chest clenched. Tears stung her eyes, but she bit them back. Caleb gone. After surviving war. After 12 years of exile. After finally crossing paths again, snuffed out in the dirt so she might escape. The third voice grew closer. The ravine. She might have gone in there, too narrow for horses. Said the first, "Michaels, check it on foot. We'll keep forward in case she doubled back." Bootsteps crunched against stone. Lantern light flared, shadows stretching long across the walls. Eveline pressed deeper into a hollow in the rock, clutching the ledger tight against her chest with one hand, a jagged stone in the other, a pitiful weapon, but it was all she had. The man drew nearer, his breath rasped, boots scraping, lantern held high. She could hear the slosh of oil inside the glass. The light swept across the floor, hunting for sign of her. Closer, closer. Then pebbles tumbled further down the ravine, a sharp clatter against stone. The guard froze. "Who's there?" His voice rang harsh against the walls. No answer came. He raised the lantern higher, eyes narrowing, and edged forward cautiously. As he passed her hiding place, attention fixed on the noise ahead, Eveline's chance came. She moved. Eveline Cross rose silently from her crouch, every muscle trembling but steady with purpose. With all the strength fear and desperation could lend her, she brought the stone crashing down on the back of the man's skull. Samuel Blackwood's scout Michaels fell without a sound. His lantern slipped from his hand, and Eveline caught it before it shattered on the stone, plunging the ravine into smothering darkness. For a heartbeat she stood motionless, listening. The night carried voices, rough and confident, drifting from the trail beyond. The other riders hadn't yet realized their companion had gone silent. She could feel her pulse hammering in her throat as she asked herself the question, every fugitive faces back the way she came, or deeper into the unknown. The choice was snatched from her when one of the riders called out, "Michaels, you find anything." Eveline snuffed the lantern's flame, slipped deeper into the ravine, and pressed her hands to the rough walls, letting the cold stone guide her. The passage wound and twisted, sometimes pinching so tight she had to edge sideways, other times opening into cavern-like hollows where floodwaters had carved pools in ages past. Behind her, shouts carried a rising unease as the men wondered at their comrade's absence. Soon they would come. And when they found him lying still, the hunt would sharpen like a knife. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Her limbs screamed with fatigue, yet she pressed forward. Then something changed the air. Fresher now, tinged with sage and dust. Eveline's chest tightened with hope. There had to be an opening. She emerged at last into moonlight. The ravine's mouth spilled onto a steep slope that led to a stand of juniper trees, beyond which rolled the open desert country of Arizona. She hesitated at the edge, knowing that one wrong move would silhouette her for watchful eyes. Drawing a slow breath, Eveline began her descent. She crept low, moving from scrub to scrub, heart pounding at every whisper of gravel beneath her boots. If she could only reach the cover of the junipers, she might yet circle back toward the Redstone River rendezvous without being seen. The crack of a rifle split the night. Dust exploded at her feet. Eveline froze, terror cutting her breath short. "That's far enough," a voice called from the shadows beneath the junipers. "Next shot won't miss." A figure stepped into the moonlight, rifle leveled. Eveline recognized him instantly, scars on her back flaring with the memory of his cruelty. Samuel Blackwood, foreman of Silver Peak Mine, the man who had overseen her torment. "You've led us a hell of a chase, Miss Cross," he drawled, his voice oily with false civility. "Mr. Holloway is eager to continue your conversation." "Victor Holloway is a murderer," Eveline replied, her voice steadier than her pounding heart. "A slaver, a criminal." Blackwood only shrugged, smile thin as wire. "He also pays my salary, and you have something he considers his best handed over before things turn ugly." Her hand brushed unconsciously against her shirt, where the ledger pressed against her ribs. Blackwood's eyes tracked the gesture, his grin widening. "That's right. The book. Give it to me, and maybe Mr. Holloway will show a touch of mercy." "There's no mercy in Victor Holloway," Eveline said flatly. "Not for me. Not for anyone." Blackwood's tone turned colder. "True enough. But there are kinds of suffering, Miss Cross. Quick or slow. That's the choice." She scanned the slope. Too open, he'd gun her down before she made 2 steps. The ravine behind offered no return. The junipers could give cover, but Blackwood stood between her and salvation, his rifle never wavering. "Your friend made his choice," he said, as if reading her mind. "Died hard. You don't have to do the same." At the mention of Caleb, Eveline's fear hardened into fury. "Caleb Whitmore was worth 10 of you," she said, her voice like steel, "and 100 of Holloway for the first time." Blackwood's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. "The ledger, now. You want it." Eveline straightened, gaze unflinching. "Come and take it." For a heartbeat he looked stunned. Then rage twisted his features. He raised the rifle, sighting carefully. The crack of a gunshot split the night again, but this time the echo carried a different truth. Blackwood jerked in surprise, gaze dropping to the blood blooming across his chest. His rifle slipped from nerveless fingers. He staggered, knees buckling, before pitching forward into the dust. Eveline froze, hardly able to believe it. She hadn't fired. She hadn't seen anyone approach. Then a voice she knew better than her own name called softly from the shadows. "Eveline." Her knees nearly gave way. From beneath the junipers stepped a figure, limping, one arm clutched tight to his side. In the other hand, a revolver still trailed a wisp of smoke. "Caleb." She breathed, stumbling toward him. He moved into the moonlight, and her heart clenched. His clothing was torn and caked with blood. Dirt and soot streaked his face. The bandage on his leg was crude, already soaked through with red, yet his eyes clear, sharp, alive, locked on hers with fierce relief. "You're alive," Eveline whispered. She caught him as he stumbled, lowering him against a juniper trunk. They said you were gone." 6 bullets. Caleb managed a grim smile, his voice ragged but laced with dry humor. "Exaggerated. Only 2 found me. The rest missed." She fought tears as her hands moved to his wounds. "How did you escape? How did you find me, Jonah?" Caleb answered between labored breaths. "He heard the fight. Dragged me out a back window while they were pouring fire into the front. Sent me down the ravine. Tracking you wasn't hard. You left a trail a blind man could follow. Despite the horror." Eveline smiled at the familiar rebuke, the wilderness veteran chastising her like old times. "I'll do better next time. Next time," he repeated softly, wonder flickering in his eyes at the idea of a future shared. "The ledger is safe," she assured him, pressing a hand against her shirt. "All the proof Sheriff Sullivan needs." Caleb's eyes closed briefly, satisfaction overriding pain. "Good. Jonah's bringing him to the cabin tomorrow. If we can make it to the Redstone River," Eveline said firmly. "We will, together." She pulled him to his feet, his arm heavy over her shoulders, her own body straining to take his weight. Slowly, painfully, they began to move. The Arizona night stretched endless around them, but they pressed forward, step by step, bound by purpose and something more. No longer were they simply two broken souls chasing justice for their own wounds. They had become halves of a single story, one born in blood and fire at Willow Creek, now carried forward by stubborn hope. Behind them, Silver Peak Mine still roared with industry, ignorant of the reckoning moving steadily away in Eveline's arms. Within those stolen pages lay the ruin of Victor Halloway's empire. Ahead lay a rendezvous, and perhaps the first taste of justice for the 187 souls shackled in darkness. And somewhere, perhaps, Clara watched her final wish at last fulfilled. Her daughter had found the soldier with kind eyes, and together they carried the torch she had left behind. The Arizona hills loomed silent and ancient, bearing witness as they moved. Dawn crept over the land, washing stone and sky in pale light. Exhaustion claimed them at last, and they found refuge in a shallow cave. Eveline tended Caleb's wounds as he drifted between wakefulness and fever, her own body trembling with weariness. But for the first time in 12 years, hope felt close enough to touch. Outside, the Arizona desert softened under the early light. The sharp edges of night gave way to a watercolor wash of reds, golds, and pale pinks. Shadows stretched long over the broken ridges. A dry breeze carried the scents of sagebrush and juniper, nature's reminder that the world rolled on regardless of the wars men waged. Caleb Whitmore stirred before the sun had fully lifted. Even battered and bloodied, the habits of a soldier never left him. He stayed still at first, eyes closed, listening the chirp of canyon wrens, the whisper of the wind through rocks, the faint rustle of sand dislodged somewhere nearby. No boots, no voices, no danger close enough to strike. Only then did he open his eyes. Beside him lay Eveline Cross, her face softened in sleep. The lines of worry that had cut into her features for days were momentarily gone. For an instant, Caleb thought he saw Clara Eveline's mother, the woman he had failed to save 12 years ago. His chest tightened. Fate, in its cruel way, had given him one more chance, a chance to guard the daughter when he could not guard the mother. Eveline stirred, eyes fluttering open. A small smile touched her lips before fading, the harsh memory of their situation returning. She glanced at his leg. How bad is it? Caleb tested his limbs, each movement weighted with pain. I've lived through worse, he muttered, though the effort in his voice betrayed him. The leg's torn up, but it'll carry me. Ribs are bruised, nothing broken. Eveline pushed herself upright, moving with care. Her own back throbbed where old wounds had split again during their escape. Still, she leaned over him, hand steady, and unwrapped the rough bandage on his thigh. The wound was angry, swollen, but the bleeding had slowed. She cleaned it with the last of their water, then tore a strip from her undershirt to bind it anew. "We can't linger," Caleb said, grimacing as she tied the knot. "Victor Halloway will have riders scouring these hills by now." "How far to the cabin?" Eveline asked. 8 miles, Caleb answered, scanning the brightening sky. "Closer to 9 at this pace. We should have been there by last night." "Jonah will wait," she said quietly. "He'll know something slowed us." Caleb's jaw set. "It isn't Jonah, I fear. If Halloway learns where we're headed, he'll post men across the river. That ledger can tear his empire apart. He won't risk it reaching Sullivan's hands." Almost instinctively, Eveline touched her chest where the book lay hidden. That weight against her ribs reminded her why there was no turning back. "Then we go now," she said, rising and offering her hand. Caleb leaned on her, testing the leg. Pain flared white, but it held. He cut a stout branch for a crutch. With Eveline at his side, they set out, the sun breaking over the horizon in blinding fire. Their progress was slow, agonizingly so. Every step balanced between speed and stealth, between Caleb's faltering strength and the desert's merciless terrain. By noon, the heat bore down with punishing force. Their lips cracked, their throats burned. The single canteen was nearly dry, and no spring or creek lay ahead. When Caleb stumbled a third time, Eveline insisted they stop in a sliver of shade beneath an overhanging rock. He sank down heavily, sweat streaking through dirt on his face. The bandage seeped again, and his skin had gone pale. Eveline held out the last of the water. "Drink." He took only a sip before handing it back. "Keep it. You need it more." "So do you," she countered, but she didn't argue further. For a while they sat in silence. The desert spread endlessly before them, harsh yet eternal. These hills had watched generations of struggle and would outlast them all. Still, there was a comfort in that permanence. Caleb broke the quiet. "Tell me about her. Your mother." Eveline blinked, surprised, then softened. Clara was kind, even when everything else was cruel. She found ways to give. She sang, old songs mostly, sometimes ones she made up just for me. She taught herself to read from scraps of newspapers, and she dreamed of a school for children like us, children no one else cared to teach. Caleb listened, his face a mask of pain and reverence. "She spoke of a Union soldier once," Eveline continued, eyes far away. "Didn't know his name. Just said he treated her people as human when others spat at them. She told me, if I ever found myself lost and in need, I should look for a man with eyes like his." Eveline's gaze settled on him, and the truth hung unspoken. Caleb turned his face away. The ache in his chest was deeper than any wound. "I should have done more. For all of them. For her." "You did what you could," Eveline said softly. She knew that. "It's why she trusted you with me, even at the end." The weight of it pressed on him 12 years of exile, of ghosts he couldn't lay to rest. But Eveline's words steadied him in ways pain could not. He pushed himself upright, leaning hard on his branch. "We keep moving, the days slipping." Together they pressed on. Their steps, though slow, grew synchronized, each supporting the other when a weakness threatened to topple them. By late afternoon, the shadows lengthened, and the searing heat relented to a gentler warmth. They were perhaps 2 miles from the cabin when Caleb stopped suddenly. Raising his hand, Eveline froze, her instincts sharpening. "What is it?" He tilted his head, listening. A faint sound drifted through the still air, the rhythmic clop of hooves on stone. Horses, moving at a walk. Caleb pulled Eveline into the cover of a scraggly juniper thicket. They crouched low as the sounds grew louder. Riders, at least 3 or 4, following the faint trail that curved toward the Redstone River. "Victor's men," Eveline whispered, breath warm against his ear. "Could be," Caleb murmured. "Or Sullivan's deputies." No way to know from here. They stayed still, hearts pounding, the smell of juniper thick in their noses. If it was Holloway's patrol, stepping out meant death. If it was Sullivan's lawmen, hiding meant wasting salvation. Either choice carried risk, and in the Arizona dusk, risk had become the air they breathed. The Arizona sun was beginning its slow descent when the cry of a bird cut through the silence. 3 sharp notes, followed by 2, and then 3 again. Caleb Whitmore froze, his instincts kicking in despite the ache in his battered body. That pattern was no accident. It was Jonah Blackthorn's signal. Relief swept through him like a tide, loosening the tension in his shoulders. He answered as best he could, then forced himself upright, steadying against his walking stick before reaching to help Eveline Cross stand. Moments later, Jonah appeared around a bend, perched easily on his pinto. Behind him rode 5 more men, led by a figure with broad shoulders and a silver badge pinned squarely on his vest, the sheriff of Yavapai County, Edwin Sullivan, carried himself like a man who had weathered every storm this country had to offer. "Caleb Whitmore," Sullivan called, his deep voice echoing across the dry canyon. "I'll be damned. Thought you'd been dead for years." Caleb let out a breath that might have been a laugh if not for the pain lacing his ribs. "Came close a few times. Yesterday nearly finished the job." The sheriff dismounted, handing his reins to one of his deputies. He was a heavy-set man with a square jaw beneath a beard streaked with gray. His eyes were pale blue, sharp as a hawk's, taking in everything without missing a detail. He clasped Caleb's hand in a firm grip, then turned to Jonah. "Your friend here tells me you've got trouble with Victor Holloway and his dealings at Silver Peak Mine," Sullivan said. His gaze shifted toward Eveline, reading her with a single look. "This, the young lady." Caleb nodded. "Eveline Cross. She carries the proof, with steady hands." Eveline reached beneath her blouse and pulled out the worn ledger, its leather cracked from travel. 187 names, she said, her voice steady. "Dates, locations, payments. All the evidence you need to end Holloway's hold and free those still trapped." Sullivan flipped the book open, his brows knitting as he scanned page after page of neat but damning records. "This alone will hang a man," he said darkly. "Might hang a few more with him." "There's worse," Caleb added. His tone carried the weight of old wounds. "Holloway commanded the 23rd Georgia Battalion during the war. He ordered the massacre at Redstone Valley. Eveline lived through it. Her mother didn't." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "I remember hearing whispers about Redstone. Ugly business. You were there. Girl." Eveline met his gaze without wavering. "I was a child. My mother died shielding me. Caleb tried to save her." Understanding flickered across Sullivan's weathered features. He looked between the two of them, seeing the connection forged in loss and survival. Seems fate has a way of circling back. He gestured for his men to bring forward extra horses. Jonah nudged his pinto closer. "Glad you made it," he said simply. "Had me worrying." Caleb eased into the saddle with Jonah's help, his legs screaming in protest. "We ran into more trouble than planned. Holloway's men nearly had us boxed in." "They're still close," Jonah said grimly. "We passed a band riding high ground about an hour ago. 6, maybe 7. They moved like men with a destination." Sullivan overheard, his mouth tightening. Blackwood must have tipped them before Eveline finished him. He didn't ask questions. His eyes said he didn't need details. Instead, he barked at his deputies, "Mount up. We're heading to Prescott. If Holloway's men want a fight, better it happens on ground of our choosing." The group set out along a trail shadowing the Verde River. The setting sun painted the cliffs crimson, stretching long shadows across the rugged land. Caleb rode silently, each hoofbeat jarring his injuries, every breath a battle. Eveline, though weary, held her head high, determination etched into her face. After several miles, Jonah suddenly raised his hand. The column halted, his dark eyes fixed on a ridge above the trail. Sullivan squinted into the fading light, then muttered a curse. "Ambush," the sheriff said. Caleb followed his gaze and saw the faint gleam of metal tucked behind the rocks. The air itself seemed too still, betraying men lying in wait. Holloway's riders had beaten them here. "How many?" Caleb asked. "4, at least," Sullivan said. "Likely more we can't see." "Is there another way around?" Eveline asked quietly. Jonah shook his head. "Not without backtracking 5 miles and swimming the river. We'd ride straight into nightfall and give them time to dig in elsewhere." "They know where we're headed," Caleb said. "Running won't change that." The sheriff considered the options, his jaw working. "We could try to outrun 'em," he offered finally. "Push hard, break their line." "No." Eveline said firmly. One sprint, and Caleb's wound opens again. They'd pick us off before we cleared the bend. Be like shooting fish in a barrel. Jonah agreed. Sullivan nodded grimly. Then there's only one way left. We call them out. He turned to his men. Show of force. Maybe they'll think twice. The deputies exchanged tense glances. Facing danger was one thing. Riding headlong into an ambush was another. Caleb caught their doubt. Holloway's men aren't soldiers, Caleb said. They're thugs, bullies, used to breaking miners and scaring families. Stand tall against them, and most will scatter. Most. Sullivan agreed, but it only takes one steady rifle to end a life. He straightened in his saddle, his badge catching the last slant of sun. I'll go first. Show the law. Give them a chance to surrender. He turned to Caleb. Keep her back. If this goes bad, you and Eveline head for the river. Jonah knows where to take you. Before anyone could protest, Sullivan spurred his horse forward. He rode into the open, his figure framed by crimson rock and shadow. Raising his voice, he called, "This is Sheriff Edwin Sullivan of Yavapai County. I know you're up there. Step out and face the law." The silence stretched. Then a man rose from behind the rocks, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black coat that flapped lightly in the evening breeze. A rifle rested easy in his hands like it belonged there. His voice carried, cold and mocking. "Sheriff Sullivan," he drawled, "you brought yourself quite the company. Thought you might slip by, did you?" Caleb's hand tightened on the reins. The man's tone, the way he carried himself, it reeked of confidence born from cruelty. More figures began shifting among the stones above, rifles glinting faintly. The ambush was no bluff. Sullivan sat tall, unflinching. "Drop your weapons and ride out while you still can. You've got one chance." The man in black laughed, the sound echoing down the canyon. "One chance, Sheriff. I'd say you're the one out of chances. Victor Holloway sends his regards." The name hit the air like a hammer. Eveline's breath caught, and Caleb felt a dark fire stir in his chest. Holloway's shadow stretched long, but this time the law and truth rode with them. The standoff had begun. Even at that distance, the figure who stepped into view radiated a presence that stilled the air. The cut of his coat, the way he held his rifle, and the unshakable confidence in his posture marked him as more than another paid gunman. Eveline Cross stiffened in her saddle, her hands tightening around the reins until her knuckles shone white. "It's him," she breathed. Victor Holloway came himself. Caleb Whitmore felt his chest tighten. For years he had carried the shadow of that man, the one who had commanded the massacre at Redstone Valley, who had profited from the broken bodies at Silver Peak Mine. And now, here he was, standing proud above them, every bit the former colonel he once was. "This isn't your quarrel, Sheriff," Holloway called, his voice carrying easily down the slope. It was the polished accent of a Southern officer, steeped in authority and arrogance. "My business is with the two thieves you're protecting." Sheriff Edwin Sullivan urged his horse a step forward, his badge catching what little light remained. "Your business is with me now, Holloway." "I've got sworn testimony and a ledger filled with proof kidnapping, forced labor, murder. You'll answer for every last count. I'm placing you under arrest." The man in black laughed, a hollow sound that cut through the canyon like cold steel. "Evidence. You say the word of a runaway and a half-crazed hermit. No jury west of the Mississippi would convict on that." Sullivan's reply was steady. Not just their word. "I've got your ledger, Victor, the real one. Names, dates, money exchanged, every soul you bought, every worker you drove into the ground, all recorded in your own hand." A heavy silence followed, the kind that made even the horses uneasy. Caleb could see it in Holloway's eyes, the wheels turning. the calculations of a man accustomed to wriggling out of every corner. At last, his voice rang out again, but the polished veneer had hardened into iron. "That ledger is my property, stolen from my office. Return it now, and perhaps I'll let this little misunderstanding fade away." "Not a chance!" Sullivan shot back. "You've got two choices, surrender and face trial, or resist and fall right here. Either way, your empire at Silver Peak is finished." Holloway lifted a hand in signal, and suddenly the ridge came alive. Shadows rose into men, rifles gleaming. What Sullivan had guessed to be 4 was at least double 8, maybe more. Holloway's voice dripped with renewed confidence. 4 deputies against my 8. The odds are poor. Sheriff, I'd say you're badly outmatched. Sullivan didn't flinch. Last chance. Holloway, step down peaceful, or we'll bring you down hard. Caleb's pulse quickened. He could feel Eveline's fear beside him, hear the catch of her breath as if it were his own. The balance hung on a knife's edge, one wrong move away from blood. Then Jonah Blackthorn's voice rang out, calm but carrying iron beneath the words. He had edged his horse alongside Sullivan while the colonel's men were distracted. 8 against 4 might look like good odds to you. "Colonel," he called. But what about 8 against 20 at Jonah's signal? Men began stepping out of the trees and from behind the rocks flanking the trail. They came from all walks, freedmen Caleb had once guided to safety, local farmers hardened by grief, gaunt survivors who still bore the marks of Holloway's cruelty at Silver Peak. Their faces carried scars and determination in equal measure, every rifle leveled at the ridge. Caleb's throat tightened. "Jonah," he whispered, astonished at the force his friend had gathered. Jonah gave the faintest smile. "Been busy while you were locked in that mine. Word spreads quick when folks have a reason to hope. On the ridge." Holloway's men shifted nervously, their earlier bravado faltering as they realized the tide had turned. The colonel alone remained rigid, pride etched into every line of his frame. "This changes nothing," he barked, though his voice cracked faintly. "These people have no authority. This land is mine, my men, my law. Not anymore," Sullivan answered, his voice ringing with the weight of command. "These people carry the authority of justice, long denied. Any man who surrenders now will be treated fair. Resist, and I can't promise you'll live to regret it." The threat of choice worked. 2 rifles lowered, then another, then more, one by one. The colonel's hired guns laid down their arms until only Holloway and a single loyal follower remained. Fury twisted Holloway's face. "Cowards, traitors," he shouted. "It's over." "Colonel," Sullivan called, "don't make this worse." For a heartbeat, it seemed Holloway might yield. His rifle dipped slightly, his jaw clenched as though weighing surrender. Then, with startling speed, he snapped the barrel up and fired not at Sullivan, not at the deputies, but at Eveline Cross. Caleb reacted without thought. He hurled himself sideways, wrenching Eveline from the saddle just as the shot cracked. The bullet split the air where she had sat a blink earlier, burying itself deep in a tree trunk. Chaos erupted. Rifles thundered. Bullets sparked against stone. Dust exploded in the canyon as Sullivan's deputies and Jonah's volunteers returned fire. Holloway and his lone ally ducked behind the ridge rocks, firing blindly downhill. Caleb hit the ground hard, his wounded leg screaming. Eveline landed beside him, both scrambling for what meager cover a boulder offered. Their horses, spooked by the noise, bolted down the trail, leaving them with nothing but grit and resolve. "Stay down," Caleb ordered, pulling the revolver he had taken from Blackwood's corpse. His left hand wasn't steady, but it would have to do. Eveline crouched close, clutching the boulder as shots whined past. The fight above raged on. Sullivan's deputies fired in disciplined bursts, holding steady lines. Jonah's men began circling, using the canyon walls to climb toward the ridge, tightening a noose around the colonel's position. "He was aiming for me," Eveline whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "You're the witness he fears most," Caleb answered grimly. "Your voice ties him to Redstone Valley more than any ledger ever could." A cry rang out from the ridge. One of Holloway's last loyalists crumpled, his rifle clattering against stone. Gunfire slackened, reduced now to a single desperate rhythm. Sullivan barked orders, his men advancing cautiously up the slope under covering fire. Jonah led a handful of volunteers in a flanking maneuver, climbing steadily closer. Then, suddenly, the canyon fell silent. No more shots, only the rasp of wind over stone. "Did they get him?" Eveline whispered. Before Caleb could answer, movement on the far side of the ridge caught his eye. Victor Holloway was fleeing, scrambling down the rocks with surprising agility, driven by desperation. He leapt from boulder to boulder, eyes locked on the line of cottonwoods at the canyon's edge where a tethered horse waited. There, Caleb shouted. Sullivan turned in time to see Holloway dash across the slope, coat flaring behind him. Deputies scrambled to cut him off, but their positions were wrong. They had been chosen to fight uphill, not chase a retreat. Holloway was slipping free. Caleb braced against the boulder, revolver in hand. The distance was long, his vision blurred by pain and exhaustion. His leg throbbed, his ribs ached, but he knew the truth. If Holloway reached that horse, justice would vanish with him. Redstone Valley. Clara, every soul broken under Silver Peak, all of it would be lost. He exhaled slowly, steadying the pistol with both hands. The world narrowed to the sight, the figure of Victor Holloway running for the trees. Caleb Whitmore, who had failed too many before, refused to fail this time. He squeezed the trigger. Caleb steadied his breath, the revolver firm in his hands as Victor Holloway darted for the trees. The colonel's escape was seconds away from becoming reality. Caleb aimed down the barrel, body trembling from pain and fatigue. But before he could squeeze the trigger, Eveline's hand closed over his wrist, soft but certain. "Wait," she whispered. Her eyes didn't waver from the fleeing figure. Caleb looked at her, searching her face. She gave a small shake of her head, then spoke again, low and steady. "Let me." In that moment, Caleb understood. This wasn't just about ending a tyrant's reign. It was about Eveline reclaiming what had been stolen from her at Redstone Valley 12 years ago. Her mother's blood still cried out for justice, and only her hand could answer. Without argument, he handed her the revolver. Eveline adjusted her stance, the way Caleb had taught her in hushed moments along the trail. Her breathing slowed, her gaze sharpened, and in her steady hands the weapon seemed less like steel and powder and more like a vessel for destiny. Caleb watched her, a surge of pride mingling with sorrow. The canyon held its breath. Eveline fired. The shot cracked across the valley, echoing against the rocks. Victor Holloway stumbled mid-stride, his body jerking violently before he collapsed onto the earth just short of the cottonwoods. His run for freedom was over, cut down by the daughter of the woman he had condemned. Silence fell, heavy and reverent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though the Arizona desert itself acknowledged the finality of the moment. Eveline lowered the revolver, her arms trembling slightly, not from doubt, but from release. She handed the weapon back to Caleb without meeting his eyes. Her gaze remained locked on the lifeless figure by the trees. "It's done," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. Caleb nodded, the weight of her words sinking into him. "Yes," he replied. "It's done." Jonah Blackthorne was the first to move toward them, his eyes sweeping over Caleb's pale face and the blood seeping through his bandages. "You need a doctor," he muttered, crouching down to examine the wound. "Both of you." Sheriff Edwin Sullivan joined them, his boots crunching over gravel, his expression grim yet satisfied. "Dead," he confirmed after glancing toward Holloway's still body. "Clean shot. Center mass." His gaze shifted to Eveline. "You're doing." "Yes," she answered simply, steady in her admission. The sheriff gave a single nod. No judgment in his eyes, only respect. In the rough country of the frontier, justice often arrived by unexpected means. And tonight, justice had worn Eveline Cross's steady hands. "What about Silver Peak?" Caleb asked, his voice gravelly. "My men are already on their way," Sullivan replied. "With Holloway gone, and this ledger in hand, we've got everything needed to shut the mine and free those still trapped there." He gestured toward the volunteers Jonah had brought, many of whom were now helping corral the few remaining gunmen. "Looks like they'll have a place to go, too. Your friend's been working on a settlement." Jonah shrugged at Caleb's questioning glance. "Just making use of your old cabin," he said lightly. "Folks need somewhere to start over." "My cabin," Caleb repeated, a trace of disbelief coloring his voice. Jonah's lips twitched into a small smile. "Figured you wouldn't be needing it. Not with other paths waiting." Caleb turned to Eveline, who watched the exchange with quiet focus. Unfinished business indeed. The circle that had begun in blood at Redstone Valley was closing now, with the faint promise of something new taking shape. Sullivan cut the moment short. "We should move. Prescott's still a ride off, and you both need tending. With Jonah's help." Caleb pushed himself upright. The effort left him reeling, light-headed and nauseated, but Eveline was there instantly, slipping beneath his arm, steadying him. "Lean on me," she murmured, echoing words she'd spoken through the long nights of their flight. "We'll make it together." So they did, step by painful step, until they were mounted once more and riding under the sheriff's watchful eye toward Prescott. The journey blurred for Caleb. Pain rolled through him in relentless waves, pulling him in and out of awareness. He dimly recalled Eveline riding beside him, her hand occasionally brushing his arm to steady him in the saddle. Voices floated in and out of reach Jonah's calm reassurances, Sullivan's firm commands to his men. By the time they reached the town, fever had taken hold. Caleb remembered being lifted from the horse. Eveline's voice sharp with worry, the lanterns of Prescott flickering like stars as his vision dimmed. The next days became fragments in his memory, disconnected flashes rather than any continuous story. The town doctor's lined face bending over his leg as he stitched and cleaned the wound. Sheriff Sullivan's voice nearby, giving updates about the mine and the arrests. Jonah slipping in and out, silent as stone, always present when Caleb's fever dragged him toward the dark. And Eveline always. Eveline. Her voice read articles from the newspaper, her hands replaced bandages, her cool cloths soothed his burning forehead. Her presence became the anchor that held him tethered when fever threatened to sweep him away. On the 5th day, he woke fully. Sunlight streamed through the window of a small, neat room, the sounds of Prescott wagons rattling, voices carrying, the bark of a dog filtered in from outside. For a moment, Caleb simply lay there, taking in the reality of survival. "Welcome back," came a soft voice. He turned his head. Eveline sat beside the bed, a book open in her lap. She looked different, clean, rested, dressed in a plain blue gown someone must have given her. Her dark hair was neatly braided over one shoulder, catching the light. "How long?" Caleb asked, his voice hoarse. 5 days, she answered, closing the book to pour him a glass of water. "Doctor wasn't sure you'd make it. Said the wound festered and you'd lost too much blood." He drank gratefully, the cool liquid easing his raw throat. Silver Peak, he asked. Shut down, Eveline said, satisfaction evident. Sullivan's deputies freed everyone, 187 people, just like the ledger said. Most have already gone west to California or other territories. Some stayed. Jonah's been helping them settle on the land near your cabin. Caleb managed a faint smile. At my cabin? Eveline returned the smile. He's expanded it, new cabins, gardens, even a schoolhouse. It's becoming a real community. The idea, once unthinkable, sat easier with him now. The solitude he had once clung to no longer seemed necessary. And Holloway's men? Caleb asked. The ones who surrendered are in jail, she replied. Some will hang, others will see prison. They found Blackwood's body where I left him. Sheriff wrote it as self-defense. Her calm delivery revealed how much she had changed. The frightened woman Caleb had found in the desert was gone. In her place stood someone tempered by fire, certain of her place in the world. And you, he asked quietly, what happens now? Eveline hesitated, then spoke with thoughtful certainty. Sheriff Sullivan offered me a position. They're starting a school here in Prescott. He said I'd be the right one to lead it. Eveline's voice carried a quiet strength when she finally spoke. They need women willing to teach children from all backgrounds. The sheriff said I'd be good at it. Caleb studied her face, the resolve there reminding him so much of Clara. You would, he said simply. Your mother would be proud. For a heartbeat, a shadow crossed Eveline's expression, but it passed quickly, replaced by a gentle acceptance. I think she would. Teaching was what she wanted to do herself, before everything. She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. Both of them carried the memory of Redstone Valley, the raid, the fire, the massacre that had changed their lives forever. What about you? Eveline asked after a moment, her eyes steady on his. When you're healed, will you go back to the hills? It was the same question she had posed before they infiltrated Silver Peak, but now it felt different, heavier. Back then, it had been an abstract possibility. Now, it demanded an answer. Caleb exhaled slowly. I don't know. I've spent 12 years hiding from the world. Not sure I remember how to live in it. Her expression softened, not with pity, but with understanding. Maybe you don't need to figure everything out at once, she suggested. Maybe it's enough to take the first step and see where it leads. Her words hit him harder than he expected. There was wisdom there, simple and true. A gift, perhaps, passed down from Clara herself. He let the phrase roll across his mind. A first step, he murmured. I suppose I could manage that much. A knock sounded at the door, interrupting them. Eveline rose to answer. Jonah Blackthorne stepped inside, and his usually stoic face cracked into a rare smile. About time you decided to join the living, Jonah said, striding to Caleb's bedside. I was starting to think you enjoyed all the attention. Caleb snorted softly, though the laugh caught in his bruised ribs. Been better places to rest, that's certain. Jonah chuckled, but his expression sobered quickly. I brought news you'll want. Sullivan got a wire from the territorial governor. Silver Peak Mine is officially deeded to the former workers as reparations land, buildings, equipment, all of it. Eveline's eyes widened. That's incredible. She breathed. They'll have a real chance to build something. They already have, Jonah replied, elected a council to run things, set up work schedules, even profit sharing. He glanced at Caleb, amusement flickering in his eyes. They asked if you'd consider serving as an advisor when you're back on your feet. Figured the man who pulled off a jailbreak under Holloway's nose might have ideas about keeping things running right. Caleb blinked, caught off guard. I don't know the first thing about mining. Neither did they. Until Victor Halloway forced them to learn, Jonah countered. They know the work. What they need is someone who understands strategy, people, and survival. You've lived long enough with all three. Caleb shook his head slowly, the irony not lost on him. For 12 years he had lived apart from people, refusing responsibility, turning away from society. And now, here was an entire community asking him to step into a role of leadership. The idea was daunting and strangely appealing. Think on it, Jonah said, reading Caleb's conflicted silence. No rush. The doctor says you've got weeks before you're strong enough to travel. He stayed a while longer, sharing news of the settlement near Caleb's old cabin, how the small clearing had grown into something bigger, with gardens planted and families beginning to build lives again. When Jonah finally left, promising to return the next day, the room grew quiet once more. Eveline settled back into her chair, her gaze thoughtful. An advisor to a mining town, she mused. That's quite a change for the man who called himself a hermit in the Arizona hills. Caleb managed a faint smile. More than I bargained for when I followed those gunshots into Silver Peak. You could have kept walking the other way, she reminded him. Would have been simpler, but not better. The truth in her words settled between them like something solid. Nothing about their path had been simple fleeing, fighting, surviving, but through all of it, something worthwhile had taken root. Justice for Eveline, redemption for Caleb, and perhaps the possibility of building something together out of all the ashes. What would Clara think of all this? I wonder, Caleb said softly. Eveline was quiet, considering carefully. She would see it as proof her trust wasn't misplaced. She answered finally. Even in her last moment, she saw something in you worth believing in. That hasn't changed. Caleb turned his face away, his throat tightening with emotion. He had carried the weight of that trust for 12 years, certain he had failed. Now, with Eveline beside him, he realized fate had given him another chance not to replace what had been lost, but to honor it by moving forward. First steps, he said again, almost to himself. First steps, Eveline repeated with a soft smile. The rest will come when it's time. Outside the window, Prescott carried on with its ordinary rhythm wagons clattering over dirt streets, voices calling greetings, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer shaping hot iron. Life moving forward, steady and unbothered by the burdens individuals carried. In a few weeks, decisions would have to be made. The council at Silver Peak would need an answer. Eveline would begin her teaching position. The future, long postponed by guilt and grief, would come pressing in. But for now, in that sunlit room, survival itself was enough. It was enough that Clara's daughter had found the soldier with kind eyes her mother had trusted. Enough that Caleb Whitmore had finally stopped running from his ghosts. Enough that after 12 long years of darkness, there was light again. The Arizona hills would stand long after them, ancient and unmoved. Yet for Caleb and Eveline, those hills would never again symbolize hiding. Instead, they marked a place where justice had been won, promises honored, and new beginnings made possible. As the afternoon sun poured golden light across the wooden floorboards, Caleb allowed himself, for the first time in years, to think of the future. Not grand visions or detailed plans, but simple things, conversation over coffee, the rhythm of work that mattered, the sound of shared laughter. First steps, indeed. And, for the first time in 12 years, Caleb Whitmore was ready to take them, not alone, but with Eveline Cross beside him. The circle that had begun in fire at Redstone Valley was complete at last. And in its closing, a new circle had only just begun. Life often gives us second chances when we least expect them. Caleb and Eveline's story reminds us that even after decades of regret and grief, healing can begin with a single step. We cannot change what has been lost, just as Caleb could never undo the tragedy at Redstone Valley. But we can honor those memories by how we live today. For those of us who have lived long enough to carry both triumphs and regrets, the lesson is clear: the past does not have to be a prison. It can be a guide. The people we've loved and lost, the promises we once thought broken, they can still find meaning if we choose to act with courage now. It is never too late to stand for what is right, never too late to reach for hope, and never too late to let compassion redefine the rest of our days. Caleb found redemption not by forgetting the past, but by facing it with honesty and walking forward beside Eveline. And perhaps that is a truth for all of us. Healing begins not in grand gestures, but in the quiet decision to keep moving, one step at a time. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey with us.